According to the CDC, 1 in 54 children were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder in 2019. Furthermore, one of the most prominent characteristics and challenges of ASD is the lack of communication skills, with nearly 25% of those diagnosed not able to use spoken language as their primary means of communication. Therefore, the problem this quantitative study will address is the communication skills of children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD. The purpose is to then explore the impact the picture exchange communication system has on the communication skills of children diagnosed with ASD. The creators of PECS, Lori Frost and Dr. Andrew Bondi, specifically designed the program to teach nonverbal children diagnosed with autism how to communicate with the world around them. So I've zoomed in on the previous table, and as you can see where it's highlighted yellow, Wade and Zach are diagnosed with severe autism, with Wade being 5 years old and Zach being 4. Now highlighted in blue is Wyatt and Haley, who both have moderate autism and are 3 years old. Figure 1 shows the progress made by Wade, Wyatt, and Zach, but as you can see where it says baseline, it's circled yellow, and the highlighted dots on the left side of that vertical dotted line, those 3 lines of dots. That is the baseline period in which all 3 children had 0 communicative behaviors throughout the baseline session. This just means that whenever the communication partner tried to initiate communication with the child, they weren't acknowledged. Now, this is the bottom of figure 1 showing that Haley just had 1 communicative behavior during their baseline period. Now, if you look to the right of the vertical dotted line, you can see when the PECS implementation starts and how she had a very slow start, whereas the others had quite a significant jump. On the other hand, in the first 3 sessions, Wade and Zach, which are the 2 with severe autism, had a combined average of 5.6 communicative behaviors. This correlates to 18 minutes of just phase 1. So where those yellow boxes are shows their communicative behaviors for the first 3 PECS sessions. Individually, Wade had 28 communicative behaviors within these first 3 sessions. Furthermore, Wyatt, who is one of the youngest participants in the study, went from 0 communicative behaviors to 12 communicative behaviors in just the first session alone. Now, when you add up all of Wyatt's communicative behaviors from the first 4 sessions, he had a total of 30 communicative behaviors, which is huge when he started at just 0. So first, communication itself is very broad. It's verbal, it's nonverbal, and there's multiple tiers that start soon after a baby is born. For example, even as an infant, you're still aware and partially receptive. Like when a mother starts talking to their baby, often you'll see them grin, which is an example of receptive communication. So for a typically developing child, these receptive and expressive behaviors start more quickly than a child who may have ASD, because autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects certain processes of the brain, particularly communication. More specifically, research shows that children diagnosed with ASD have specific deficits in spoken language, social communication, and overall proper social behaviors. And when would someone start to see these deficits? When that child starts preschool. Preschool is one of the most critical periods of language and communication development. So if there are some delays, it is important to keep an eye out so that child can receive early intervention and hopefully get them back on track. Over 20 years ago, there was little to no knowledge about autism and how it affects the brain or how it affects an individual's learning. Traditional devices were unsuccessful because they did not address the primary characteristics of autism, especially how they learn and how their minds work. Now, the technical term for communication devices is AAC, or Augmentative and Alternative Communication Devices. Although, even with the use of traditional communication devices, studies show that only 10 to 15% of children diagnosed with ASD were minimally verbal. More recently, the AAC device that has been seeing lots of progress is the Picture Exchange Communication System, but I'm going to call it PECS. Now, PECS is unique from other devices because it was specifically designed for teaching children who are diagnosed with ASD to learn functional communication skills. Studies show that children who have completed the PECS training have not only learned how to use the process across various environments, but also learned to use verbal communication. The PECS program was developed after many failed attempts to teach children with ASD to communicate properly. Many studies have been done that show the effectiveness of PECS on communication, including allowing those who complete it to apply their new skills across various environments. There are two theories that this study will utilize, one that deals with how to teach and implement PECS training, and the other to explain how the PECS works. The first theory is operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a behavioral therapy created by B.F. Skinner. Skinner's theory suggests that positive reinforcements allow for preferred behaviors to occur more often. He also believed that behaviors are a reaction to the consequence, or better yet, the reward earned from certain behaviors. There are two main forms of positive reinforcement to consider when teaching children a new skill, and particularly when doing it with children who have communication deficits: primary reinforcements and secondary reinforcements. For the purpose of this study, the focus is primarily on utilizing positive reinforcements to add new skills, specifically teaching students how to exchange a picture for the desired item. A primary reinforcement is things linked to a primary need, such as food or water. This is also known as a reward that strengthens the behavior itself. On the other hand, a secondary reinforcement is an item or thing that strengthens desired behavior because it correlates with the primary need. For example, getting enough food and communicating "all done" would be a secondary reinforcer due to the fact that the child was able to successfully communicate all dietary needs until they were filled. Secondary reinforcement in connection to operant conditioning would be the satisfaction of accurately communicating their needs and wants to a communication partner and inevitably increasing their self-confidence as well as communication skills. The second theory utilized in the study is the cognitive load theory. This theory suggests that humans only have a certain amount of cognitive load available at one time before it either gets forgotten or moved to long-term memory. Because children with ASD typically have smaller cognitive load, they typically require small amounts of information in quick bursts and lots of repetition. The phases of PECS utilize simple pictures, shortened requests, and repeated skills, exactly what children with autism need. Therefore, combining all of these aspects of ASD with a new instructional approach while also considering a child's cognitive load can more accurately allow a child to be successful in learning new communication skills. In terms of this study, the use of PECS aligns with this theory in that it is based primarily around the mind of a child with communication deficits. This is the sample method and description. So first, this is a quantitative study that will allow researchers to study the impact that PECS has on the communication skills of children diagnosed with ASD. The dependent variable PECS and the independent communication skills of children diagnosed with autism. Data collection will be done using a pre-test, post-test format using the Communication Complexity Scale, also known as CCS. This will allow researchers to gather statistical data to evaluate progress and results. The sample will be a purposive sample due to the information being measured in the study. A purposive sample allows researchers to ensure that participants have the specific characteristics to accurately measure the impact of the dependent variable on the independent variable. Therefore, the criteria for this purposive sample are children who are diagnosed with ASD in grades kindergarten through third grade. With that said, the population will consist of elementary students in kindergarten through third grade who attend one of the 4 elementary schools in Marshall County School District. There are 2 forms of instrumentation that will be utilized in this study, with the Communication Complexity Scale, also known as CCS, being the assessment tool for the pre-test and the post-test. The CCS is a 12-point assessment tool that is designed to measure communicative abilities of nonverbal children, children diagnosed with ASD, or other forms of disabilities affecting communication. The other form of instrumentation will be a reinforcement sampler, also known as a preference assessment, which just allows the communication partner to know which items are highly desired, and in turn will need to have those available for the student to choose from when PECS training starts. Now here are the procedures lined out for this study. The first step of the action plan is to send out consent forms and additional information about the study to the Board of Education. Then, once approved, I'll send it to the 4 elementary principals and finally the teachers, parents, and paraprofessionals. Once all consent forms have been approved, we move to the next step, which is training the paraprofessionals. They will be trained on how to be a communication partner once the PECS program begins with the children. At the same time, all children will be given the pretest using the CCS. After training and pretests are completed, the PECS Phase 1 may begin with children diagnosed with ASD and their assigned communication partners. The next step is recording the data. Communication partners will log data throughout each session, making notes of what happened and if the task at hand was successful or not. Next is when the PECS training is completed, the information learned by students will be measured once again using the CCS as the post-test. Data from the pre-test and post-test will be evaluated and transformed into a statistical representation of the impact PECS has on the communication skills of children diagnosed with ASD. There are a few limitations that could have an impact on this study. The first one being the sample and population coming from just one school district. Although characteristics of ASD are common in terms of levels of communication skills, this aspect would be addressed in the sampling process when determining each student's characteristics and whether they fit the criteria of the study. Furthermore, using purposive sampling also allows for limitations because personal judgment is used when choosing participants. Judgment could be an error, which could have an impact on the overall study. And lastly, a common aspect of children diagnosed with ASD is challenging behavior, but even more so if they are nonverbal and we can't predict if a participant is going to have a rough day, so these possible behaviors could impact the PECS process and data collection throughout the study. Due to the population and age of the children required for this study, informed consent will be of utmost importance before beginning the study. Families, subjects, paraprofessionals, teachers, and all other people involved in the study will be able to ask questions at any time as well as forfeit from the study at their leisure. Along with the consent forms will be a packet of detailed information about study procedures, the reason for the study, risks, benefits, and additional resources that may be utilized for further information about the study and the PECS training program. Now, when students take their pretest using the communication complexity scale, the results will be documented and kept in a safe location until the end of the study. These results will only be pulled out after children have taken it again for their post-test and used to compare data. Students will first be given a pretest to measure their communicative behaviors using the CCS. Students will then begin Phase 1 of the Picture Exchange Communication System. Once they have mastered all phases, they will be given a post-test using the same CCS exam. Therefore, to see a growth in student achievement, the data would need to represent a statistical increase in scores from the pretest to the post-test results of the CCS. There are a few things that I've noticed that I would change about my original plan. First, I would include more specific details about my sampling procedures as well as the specific criteria and qualities that would be measured to be considered as a participant. Next, I would include who would be giving the communication complexity scale assessment for the pre and post tests, such as the school psychologist or would I need to find my own psychologist, because regardless, this person would need to be included in the consent forms and information packet. In my action plan, I need to determine when baseline data would be collected. Right now, it just says after training everyone, the first phase of PECS would start. Even more so, I would need to outline the timeline in which each phase would take place. Although, per the PECS training, it really does depend on the student. They must master a phase before they can move on to the next one, and that can be different for every participant. Lastly, I think I would try to use a younger age group. There are a lot of special education and self-contained preschool settings in the area, and based off the research I have done, it is best to start PECS training as early as possible if we want to see great results like those students had from my support data in the beginning. Here's what I found for some additional research that I could do. To improve student achievement, I think it would be beneficial to do more research on the different kinds of communication assessments to use as the pretest and post-test. I think the CCS would work fine, but it is only a 12-point assessment, whereas others are much more complicated. So with more research, I could find an assessment that would better suit the population of students I have, as well as providing more information regarding their communication, communicative behaviors, their IQ, and so on. And that wraps up my research proposal. I hope you enjoy listening and that you've learned something new. Thanks for watching.